All right, today we are going to start our notes on percent proportions. There's a couple things that you need. You obviously need your composition notebook, and then you need 5 different colored pencils. I'm using a teal, a blue, a pink, a purple, and an orange. Okay, so make sure you have 5 different colors. Doesn't really matter what colors they are. When you open up your composition notebook, we're going to fill out our table of contents. We are on page 16, so under page 16, I'm going to write percent proportions. Percent proportions. I'm going to turn to page 16 in my notebook, and I'm going to put a 16 in the top right hand corner. And I'm going to put a title like we always do, percent proportions. There's a couple different foldables that you will be receiving. You need one foldable that looks like this. You're going to make sure that it's cut out all the way around the edges, and then also these flaps along the sides are cut out. You're going to fold it on either side so it ends up looking like this. Okay, that's the first one that we're going to start with. And percent proportions, we're just going to set up a proportion and solve it. That's the only steps that you need. And the formula for the proportion is what we're going to go over first. So you can go ahead and just leave that here while we do our first example together. In our first example, I'm going to write it above my foldable. And the first example is, what percent of 144 is 64? So I'm taking my blue colored pencil. What percent, feel free to use symbols, of 144 is 60? Now I know that doesn't really make sense to you right now, but let's write it down and then talk about what it means. So in the top left-hand corner, I'm going to use my orange colored pencil. You need to write the word is, nice and big in orange, is. Underneath the is, I'm going to use my pink colored pencil to write the word of, is over of. With my teal colored pencil, I'm going to write my percent symbol on the top right hand side of my proportion. And then with my purple colored pencil, I'm going to write my last box, which is 100. Now the only thing that will not change about this proportion is the 100. Your 100 will always be there. Since it is a proportion, we need to put an equal sign in the middle. 64, because that is the number associated with the word is. Okay, let's go to our of. My of is in pink, so I'm going to grab my pink colored pencil. What percent of 144? So I'm going to underline of 144 in pink. I'm going to flip open my of, and on the inside I'm going to write the number 144, because that's the number associated with my of. Okay, then I'm going to go to my percent. My percent is in teal, so I'm going to pick up my teal colored pencil, and it says what percent. So I'm going to underline what percent. What that means is that's what I'm trying to find out. I don't know what percent it is. If you remember how to solve a proportion, you're going to cross multiply. So I have 64 times 100. 64 times 100. I'm going to write it in the margin. So 64 times 100 is 6,400. I'm just adding my 2 zeros on. Since I cross-multiplied 64 times 100, I'm then going to divide by the number that I have not used yet, which is 144. So that I have to take my number and I have to divide it, oops, by 144. Okay, go ahead and take a minute to solve that on your paper. All right, so I have to figure out how many times 144 can go into 640, and it can go into 640 a total of 4 times. When you divide, it's really important that you line up your numbers. I'm going to put my 4 above my first 0 since 144 can go into 640 4 times. 4 times 144 is 576. I'm going to go ahead and subtract that. Do it on your paper with me. Okay, I'm going to get a remainder of 64. I still have a 0, so I'm going to bring down that 0 that I have. Again, it's the same number. I know that 144 can go into 600. If you can see the pattern right now, the 4 is going to be repeating over and over again. I'm going to use my bar notation to represent the repeating decimal. So your answer for this first example should be 44.4 repeating. I need to make sure that I label my 44.4. It's not just a number, because if I look up at my problem, it says what percent. My X was under my percent, which means I'm trying to find a percent. So my answer is not just 44.4, but my answer, I'm going to write this in my teal, is 44.4 repeating percent. Okay? It's really important if the problem asks you to find the percent, you have to label it with a percent symbol. Okay? You should have also gotten 2 of these really long rectangles. You only need 1 right now, and you're going to fold it along the dotted line so that it fits right here. Don't worry about gluing it. We can glue it later. But I'm going to take my blue colored pencil again, and I'm going to write my next problem. My next problem, 9 is 30% of what number? I'm going to go back to my original foldable, and I can see, I'm going to start with my is. My is in orange, so I'm going to read my sentence. It says 9 is, so I'm going to underline 9 is in orange. Okay. Then I'm going to go to my of. My of is in pink. I'm going to continue my sentence. 9 is 30% of what number? So I'm going to underline of what number in pink. And last thing I have to underline is my percent. My percent is in my teal. So 9 is 30%. I'm going to underline that in teal. I'm then going to flip it to the inside, and I'm going to set up my proportion. Is goes first. My 9 is associated with my is. So 9 in the top left-hand corner. Okay. Underneath my is comes my of. In pink, I'm going to write my of. It says of what number? I don't know what number it is, so that's what my variable will be. I'm going to put my X underneath my 9. Next is my percent. I can see that I underlined in teal the 30%. 30 is in the top right-hand corner of my proportion. And then last but not least, the 100 does not change at all. It stays the same. So that's going to be in the same spot as it always is. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and set up my equal sign and my fraction bars because this is I know that 9 times 100 is 900. I'm then going to divide it by the number that I have not used yet, and that is my 30. So I'm going to divide that by 30. Since both of my numbers end in a 0, I can actually just take off a 0 from both numbers. This will make it a little bit easier for me to divide, so now I just have 90 divided by 3. 3 goes into 90 3 times. 3 times 3 is 9. There is no remainder. However, I still have this 0 here, so I have to put my 0 above. Okay, so your answer for this one is the number 30. Okay, it's not a percent, it's just a number. Last example together, so get your other slip of paper, fold it just like we did the last one. Again, you're going to pick up your blue colored pencil. This time, your example is, what is 36% of 825? What is 36% of 825? Okay, I'm going to start with my is like I always do. I'm going to take my orange. What is? Okay, since it says what is, I know that that's going to be my variable, so I'm going to go ahead and underline that in orange. I'm going to flip this open and I'm going to put my variable in the top left-hand corner of my proportion. So my x is going to go on the top left. Okay, I'm going to keep going. Since it's is over of, I'm going to grab my pink colored pencil and I'm going to look for the of. What is 36% of 825? I'm going to underline the of 825 in pink. I know that my number 825 is going to go underneath my x, 825. Okay. The next thing that I'm looking for is my percent. So I'm going to go ahead and grab my teal colored pencil. What is 36%? So I'm going to take my 36. I'm going to go ahead and write it in my percent spot. And remember, a percent is always out of 100. So your 100 will never change. I'm going to go ahead and set up this proportion. Okay. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to cross multiply. I'm going to circle the numbers that I'm cross multiplying. 825 times 36. I'm going to set up my multiplication problem. 825 times 36. Go ahead and take a minute to solve that now. Six times 5 is 30. Carry my 3. 6 times 2 is 12. Plus 3 is 15. Carry my 1. 6 times 8 is 48. Plus 1 is 49. I'm going to go ahead and put my placeholder since I'm done with my 6. 3 times 5 is 15. Carry the 1. 3 times 2 is 6. Plus 1 is 7. And then 3 times 8 is 24. Okay. When you add that all together, you're going to get 29700. I'm then going to take that number and I'm going to divide it by 100. If you remember, when you divide something by 100, you don't actually have to divide. All you're doing is you're taking off 2 zeros, or in other words, moving your decimal 2 spaces to the left. In my number, I have a decimal at the very end. I'm going to take my decimal, since I'm dividing by 100, and I'm going to move it 2 spaces to the left. I'm my final answer, x equals 297. Okay? There are a couple example problems that you need to complete. So I'm going to go to the left-hand side, and I'm going to complete my example problems. The first example problem that you need to complete on your own, what percent of 80 is 20? What percent of 80 is 20? The second example that I need for you to write down, 45 is 20% of what number? Okay, 45 is 20% of what number? And then the third example, what is 40% of 70? What is 40% of 70? Remember, for each problem, you need to set up your percent proportion and show all of your work for solving it.